Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott. I just did a review of the popular Megadap ET271 Pro adapter that allows you to use Sony E-mount lenses on Nikon Z-mount cameras with autofocus. But I'm back today with a second review because Neewer has a cheaper alternative, the NW-ETZ adapter that you can get for just $160. It does have a few advantages relative to the Megadap, though the Megadap also has some advantages relative to it. I'll compare the two of these actually in a future video, but today I'm going to take a look to see if Neewer's cheaper adapter can keep up with the Megadap adapter, which cost about $250 US. So like the Megadap, these two adapters are very, very similar in size. It's a wild change from what I was accustomed to with adapters previously, typically because you're moving from a DSLR mount to a mirrorless mount, which means a pretty big difference between the flange distance, and what I mean by that is the place where the optics of the lens need to be to get proper focus throughout to infinity. And so in this case, the optical path from mirrorless had to move forward because there's no mirror that's a part of the design. In this case, you're going from one mirrorless design to another. So whereas, for example, the Sigma MC11 adapter was 26 millimeters thick and weighed about 125 grams, the Neewer adapter is only 2 millimeters thick because that's just the distance between E-mount and Z-mount in terms of the optical path, and it weighs only 46 grams. So it's a third of the weight, and of course it is a 13th of the thickness. Now, in this case, it allows you to have a very tight fit to where, in many cases, it just feels like a second mount on a lens. And as you can see here, it adds very, very little bulk to it. And so, and beyond that, I find that using lenses adapted, it doesn't even really feel like I'm using them adapted because the lens shape doesn't change, the profile, the balance doesn't change. And so I really, really love that aspect of these particular designs. I also found that there was some variation in how lenses fit in the process. I used about 7 different lenses, and I found that obviously some fit a little looser, some fit a little tighter. But what I will say is universally, once they were mounted, there wasn't any kind of wobble. It didn't feel insecure in any kind of way. The adapter themselves are quite simple. So this Neewer adapter, it's made out of, looks like some kind of stainless steel. And so on the front side, you have the contact points for the Sony E-mount lens to attach to that. And then on the rear of it, you have 2 different sets of contact points. One set is for the communication to the Z-mount body, so with the Nikon protocols. And then you also have a bit fewer contact points, and that's for firmware updating. Now, I will say in this case, it's one area where I like the Megadap better. The new version of the Megadap allows you to do firmware updates just from within the camera like you would do for a Nikon lens. In this case, however, you're using those rear contact points, and there is a magnetically attaching adapter that will attach to that, and then the other end is a USB-A port that will allow you to plug into your computer and run firmware updates from that. I find that the magnets don't really hold the adapter, or don't hold in place to the adapter itself. And so I found that to run a firmware update, there was one available, that I needed to put a finger on there and just kind of hold it down. And so that I was getting a proper contact to the electronic contacts on there. And so without that, it didn't really work right. So I don't particularly love that design there. Another thing that I don't love about the Neewer adapter as compared to the Megadap is that it doesn't communicate XF data properly. And what I mean by that, it's not a problem with the aperture value, but it isn't proper in terms of communicating the actual lens designation itself. And so, for example, with the, say the 35mm f1.4 GM or the 50mm f1.4 GM lens, it says VR, 35mm f1.4 or f1.4G. Really, none of those things are accurate outside of the actual focal length and the aperture value. But in the case of the Megadap, I actually got proper, it was coming through as the GM lens as it was. So that's one area where I don't like. One thing I do like, however, because one of my complaints about the Megadap is that you don't have any kind of weather sealing. Once you've done that, you're losing the actual gasket between the adapter and the camera body itself. So your weather sealing is probably not going to be as good. You do have an option for $20 more from Neewer to get actually one that does have a gasket, and so you can complete that weather sealing. So I appreciate that option is there. Though I will note that the one that I reviewed didn't have that gasket, and so I can't really comment on how well it fits and how well all of that works. There's one other thing that I really like about the Neewer adapter, again, that's missing on the Megadap, and that is that, as you can see here, I've actually got this is the Typox Samara 28mm f1.4. Really great manual focus lens, but it's M-mount. And so I've got an M-mount adapter to E-mount adapter, and then I have that plugged into the actual Neewer adapter. So two adapters are in place, but of course the Samara lens is a purely manual lens. There's no electronics on it at all. However, as you can see here, when I'm using it with the Neewer adapter, I actually get focus confirmation. And so it provides electronics to where even Nikon's guide, which shows you which direction you need to rotate to get to proper focus, it works. And there is the green light up box when you have achieved proper focus, and it works accurately. So that's a great kind of side benefit if you have, because it doesn't really matter what mount. I've adapted over M42 mount lenses, and again, the same kind of thing. I'm getting that electronic confirmation. That's not something that I got through the Megadap adapter, so a little bit of a bonus there. So of course the main event is how good is autofocus when you have the adapter in place. I found that in comparison to the Megadap, my results varied really widely compared to the lens I had attached. So I actually started off with the 35mm f1.4 GM, and then the Tamron 35 to 150mm VXD lens. Based on just those two lenses alone, I thought the Neewer adapter was fantastic, maybe even better than the Megadap. It autofocused really fantastically, and you can see here, for example, with the 35 GM, good, fast autofocus back and forth, great. Then I started to expand to use more lenses. So the 50mm f1.4 GM, a very similar lens in terms of the autofocus system, but for whatever reason on the Neewer adapter, I got radically different results. You can see here that focus is very slow. It is not at all confident. And that kind of was a microcosm of what I saw in general. So for example, I tried 3 different Tamron lenses. I already mentioned the 35 to 150mm worked great. The new 90mm f2.8 macro also worked great. The 28 to 200mm RXD lens, it didn't hardly work at all. In fact, I couldn't hardly get it to focus, to get even any kind of accurate autofocus at all. And so that was terrible. With Viltrox, I used the 16mm and then the 135mm lab lens. 16mm worked great. The 135mm lab, it just whined like a scared puppy and would not autofocus at all. So my results really varied very widely depending upon the lens that I had attached. And so when it works great. And so out of that list of lenses that I gave you, I would say that around 4 of them worked fantastic. But in the case of the other 3 that I tested, I got much poorer results, and in some case, no autofocus at all. So when it works, as mentioned, it works great, but it's less flexible than the Megadap. What I saw with the Megadap is that some lenses would focus more slowly than others, but all of them would focus, to some degree. And so I had much less variability on that platform. How about the video side of things? Again, it's about the same story carried out here for video. So it depends a lot on the lens itself. If I had the 50mm GM attached, you can see here that as I approached the camera, it didn't pick me up at all. Nothing. I pretended like I wasn't even there. The 35 G Master, however, picked me up just fine, even if I stepped out of frame and stepped back in. You can see that focus picked me back up fairly smoothly. Good confidence throughout, and so no problems there. So again, big variation depending on the lens you have attached. Now, if you do kind of more extreme things like focus pulls, you can see here that even with the 35 GM, the focus pulls they're not as confident as a native lens. There's a little bit more pulsing, some settling. It doesn't quite just stay on the focus point, but moves around a little bit. And so video autofocus is going to be a mixed bag, and a very mixed bag depending upon which lens that you attach. So my conclusion is this. My feeling about the Neewer NW-ETZ, obviously it varies widely depending upon the lens that I have mounted to it. When I'm using a lens that it works well with, it works great and I love it. But when it's a lens that it doesn't particularly like, it's really, really bad. I do love the manual focus confirmation, something that Megadap doesn't have. I like that there's a weather sealed option, but I think for most people, the Megadap is probably worth the extra money, particularly if you plan to use extra lenses. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you want more information, you can check out my full text review that's linked in the description down below. There's some buying links that are there as well. As always, thanks for watching, have a great day, and let the light in.